every time I post a new video. The very first prompt that I pulled out of the jar was a book over 500 pages, and I can't say I was thrilled to kick off a 7-book month with a beast. But to be honest, the book I ended up choosing, I had been reminded of the author either by a viewer or talking to a friend, and they mentioned about All the Light We Cannot See, and I remembered how much I loved that book, and so it made me go back onto Amazon and look at Anthony Doerr and look up other work that he had done, and that's how I came across the very first book that we're going to talk about today, which is Cloud Cuckoo Land. And for anyone interested, it's 641 pages long, so I more than achieved my prompt. Cloud Cuckoo Land follows 5 characters, all in different periods of time, and in different places, and the one thing that connects them all is this story of Cloud Cuckoo Land. It's like an ancient text that comes into each of their lives at some point. So the synopsis doesn't actually give that much away for this book, so I was definitely just putting my faith in the author based off of how much I loved All the Light We Cannot See. But I will say, when this book first starts, it's a little bit confusing, or at least I found it kind of confusing. It kind of jumps around all over the place, and I found myself struggling to grasp exactly what was going on. The chapters are very short, and it also starts with the Cloud Cuckoo Land story itself, because the synopsis really didn't say anything. I was just very confused, and it took me a while to kind of get a handle on the way the story is set out. I think this book is definitely a trust the process book. Once you are introduced to all 5 characters and I guess the background is laid and the stories get into the flow, you can kind of just sit back and watch the magic unfold. But I will say it is a bit of a slow burn to get to that point, and there are certain characters out of the 5 whose stories start quicker than others, and some you have to wait a little bit longer for the action. But that's not necessarily a bad thing, because once it does get going, it is mesmerising and you are fully in it, and you're very immersed into actually the 5 different worlds that Anthony manages to create. But you just have to trust the process and wait for it. Now onto the rating. I do think ultimately, despite a slow burn, the writing is masterful, and I do think Anthony is incredibly talented as an author to be able to take 5 characters from very different places and weave them in together. I actually gave this book an 8 out of 10. I thoroughly enjoyed it by the end, so I do recommend it. The prompt for book 2 was from my self-development category, and it was a book with the highest number of ratings on Amazon, and so that led me to Crying in H Mart. And this one's actually also a recommendation by a viewer, so thank you so much. Don't forget to recommend any books. Doesn't have to be self-development, can be fiction, non-fiction. I've been building a very substantial list now of books that you guys have recommended me, so they're weaving their way into my TBR. So this is actually a memoir that covers Michelle Zauner, who's the author, her life growing up Asian American with a Korean mum and an American dad, and about her struggle with her identity as a mixed race kid and woman. She grew up in America and visited Korea, often with her mum. As well as this identity struggle, it also goes into detail about her relationship with her mum, as well as her mum's cancer diagnosis of stage 4 pancreatic cancer, and then ultimately her death as well. For me, although this was suggested to me as a book on grief or around grief, it really is so much more than that, and I'm so grateful to whoever it was. I'll see if I can find who recommended it to me, but I'm so grateful to you because I just found it so insightful and so interesting. What I found particularly interesting was the description of her experience growing up as Asian American in a Western culture, the encounters and the feelings she had where she felt like she was never quite enough, or she never quite fit in, but then even when she used to go to Korea with her mum, still feeling like she didn't fully have a place in that society either. And I think she describes it as having one foot in each world, but never feeling like a whole in either. And I think that's actually really powerful. And it's something that for me, obviously, as a white woman living in a Western culture, is something that I couldn't possibly understand or fully comprehend. I've never had that experience myself, and I never will. I also feel that the parts of the memoir that focused in on grief, they were so close to home for me that kind of stepping outside of that to learn more about Korean culture or the relationship with her mum growing up was just almost like a welcome relief from the sadness that her mum went through. Her writing about grief specifically, I mean, there were some parts that felt like a sucker punch to me. There was one bit in particular where she's talking about after her mum has passed, I think she's watching a TV show or listening to something about a woman talking about her mum who passed, but it was 40 years previously, but she's still getting really upset about it. And Michelle has this realization that ever since her mum passed, she says there's a splinter in her being, and the pain will always be there, and it has been there since the day her mum died, and will be with her until the day she dies. And it's so awful, but the way she writes it and the way she expresses herself is so powerful, and it's so relatable as well. I feel like I can relate to very strongly that she gets irrationally angry at old ladies who have reached an age that her mum would never get to because she passed fairly young, as well as when she is in H Mart and she's up in the food court and she sees a woman and her son, and he isn't being, or it's not that he's being nasty, but he's being quite distant or whatever, and she really wants to go over and say, be nice to your mum, you have no idea what's going to happen and you'll regret it. And I really feel that a lot. So yeah, it's very powerful, it's very poignant, it is very heartbreaking in places, but it also, if it's something that you've been through, I think you'll also strongly relate and share that experience. Michelle is incredibly brave. It's a very raw and honest book about the complex relationship that she had with her mum and how the relationship evolved from when she was a difficult child through her teenage years all the way up until I think she was 25 when her mum passed, which is so young. And it's very refreshing to see the honesty and that she really did lay herself out there. And I think, I don't know if it's because some parts of her experience with cancer and death are fairly similar to mine, it did kind of feel like I made a friend reading the book, because the writing is so open and it's so casual and informal. It doesn't feel like, I guess it is definitely written more as a memoir than a self-development book, but I guess shared experiences on grief is always helpful, useful to not feel so alone. But when I finished reading the book, it felt like I had a bit of an empty feeling in genuinely funny, heartwarming parts to it as well. And it also really made me think about heritage and culture and experiences growing up. So it was way more than I expected going into this, thinking it was just a book on grief. So for that reason, Crying in H Mart gets a 9 out of 10. Book 3 is the first book list category of the month, and this prompt was a book written in the first person, and so that led me to another Kindle book, and it was the debut author category, and the highest voted book in that category was Children of Blood and Bone by Tomi Adeyemi. I'm very sorry if I pronounced that wrong. There is quite a lot that happens in this book, and I'm worried that I'm going to give too much away if I try to ad-lib the synopsis, so I'm going to read the blurb. But I apologise in advance if I pronounce any of the names wrong. Zelly remembers when the soil of Orisha hummed with magic, when different clans ruled, burners igniting flames, tiders beckoning waves, and Zelly's reaper mother summoning forth souls. But everything changed the night magic disappeared. Under the orders of a ruthless king, anyone with powers was targeted and killed, leaving Zelly without a mother and her people without hope. Now Zelly has a chance to bring back magic to her people and strike against the monarchy. With the help of a rogue princess, Zelly must learn to harness her powers and outrun the crown prince, who is hell-bent on eradicating magic for good. Danger lurks in Orisha, where strange creatures prowl and vengeful spirits wait in the waters. Yet the greatest danger may be Zelly herself, as she struggles to come to terms with the strength of her magic and her growing feelings for an enemy. So while book 1 of the month was a bit of a slow burn, this one just straight in. You're very quickly introduced to Zelly and her training at Mama Akbar's camp, and it's very easy to follow. So straight off the bat, you are introduced to the concept of magic and what happened. I actually did not read the blurb before I read the book, so for me I was very much going in blind, but within, I'm pretty sure it is in the first chapter, you're given the whole backstory as to what's happened, which I really like, because then you know it, let's just get moving. So I kind of cheated a little bit with the prompt. So the prompt was book written in the first person, and it is written in the first person, but 3 different people. So it semi-counts, but I love the fact that each character is such a different personality, and they add so much more depth to the story as a whole, because you get to see their different perspectives and the different feelings and everything they have. So I really like that touch. Oh, and the ruthless king described in the synopsis, so well written as a supervillain. I hated him so much, and I always think it's the power of a good author and fantastic writing when it can make you feel so strongly about a character, and it's definitely the case in this book. I think the one thing I did know about this book before I read it was that it says it's for age 12 and up, so I don't know why I thought maybe it would be a bit more tame, but it is far more graphic than I thought it was going to be. It's not Iron Gold level of hacking limbs off at any opportunity, but it is far more graphic than I was expecting, and I love it for that as well. That's definitely not a bad thing in my opinion. As with other books where there's a lot that happens, I'm going to talk in a riddle for a minute to say that there was one thing in the plot, kind of in the middle, where it slowed down quite a lot and got a little bit repetitive, and it also breaks into something that happens that, to me, didn't fit with the plot. Like, I don't think it makes sense in the main plot, but it does make sense in furthering a subplot. But I could have done without the subplot, to be honest, completely. But I understand the mass appeal, and it is hinted at in the synopsis. I understand the mass appeal, so I won't criticise it too much for that, but it did get an eye roll from me for it. And to be fair to it, it does then pick back up, and it does get back into the chase to restore magic, and it becomes very tense again and more violent, which is what we like. So it did redeem itself, but it was just that one tiny point. Yeah, that's it. That is my riddle ramble, and I absolutely love the fact that it's rooted in West African culture and mythology, and I love that all the characters are black. It's so refreshing when you see books either centred in, rooted in another culture, and giving a voice to people who don't often get the chance to shine. If you know of any other books that kind of are focused and centred like this, please let me know. I know that there are 2 more books in this series that I'll probably have to add to my TBR, so I will have to get round to it at some point. But if you know of any others, comment below. The rating. Reading this book and reading Circe last month has made me wonder if I've been lying to myself and whether I do actually like fantasy books. Because I keep saying I don't. But I loved Circe, and I really loved this book too. Or maybe it's that because they're both centred or have their origins in mythology. Maybe it's mythology that I like, but either way, I think this is a great story. It's really well paced for the most part. The characters are great, and I'm really interested to see where it goes, where the story goes for book 2 and 3. And so for that reason, I gave this an 8 out of 10. Book 4 of April was back to the personal choice TBR jar, and the prompt was a book with an animal on the cover. The first paperback of the month. So the lucky winner was The Bullet That Missed, which is the 3rd book in the Thursday Murder Club series. Because this is book 3 in the series, I'm gonna stick to the blurb so I don't get anything confused. It is an ordinary Thursday, and things should finally be returning to normal. Except trouble is never far away where the Thursday Murder Club is concerned. A decade-old cold case leads them to a local news legend and a murder with no body and no answers. Then a new foe pays Elizabeth a visit. Her mission: kill or be killed. Can the gang solve the mystery and save Elizabeth before the murderer strikes again? After the intensity of the first 3 books of the month, I actually feel like this was a welcome relief. I mean, as good as those books were, it feels like this is very familiar, easy territory, and I was very grateful for it. I think because the first anniversary of my mum's death was the day before I started this book, stepping into this book and reading it felt like it was very light, very easy, although saying that it is about murder, so you wouldn't really think it should be light, but it is, and I was very appreciative of it. And it actually is such an easy read that I read it in one sitting. I mean, the plot's not going to set the world alight, let's be honest, but it is funny, it's quirky, because it's book 3. I know all the characters now, and I enjoy that very much. It's like I guess it's become a bit of a comfort book for me now. I will say there are parts of this plot that more than the other 2 just feel so far-fetched, and if it was any other book or any other series, I would probably mark it down and eye roll. But because it is such a quirky, off-the-wall book. I will forgive it and I will just include it as part of its charm and its quirk. So, yeah, if you're after something that is very light and easy, very quick to read, this is your series, really. So with that being said, I can't really give this any lower than an 8 out of 10. It's just as good as book 1 in the series. Book 2 was better. Yeah, it's just very silly, very funny read, so it can get away with more than other books can. And I really like it. I actually don't know how many more there are in the series. I don't know if there's only one more. So I'm very intrigued to know how it's going to conclude. I hope it's not going to be anticlimactic or something sad happens, because they are, let's face it, they are all very old. But yeah, highly recommend this series if you just want something easy. On to the next. Book 5 is back in the self-development category, and the prompt from this jar was the cheapest book on Amazon, which was Me vs. Brain by Hayley Morris. I'm going to read you a section of the blurb so you can get an idea of what is covered in the book. In this book, I've overthought absolutely everything, so you don't have to. I'll be talking about everything from dating to discharge, mental health to menstrual cups. I might not be able to banish your anxiety or make you feel 100% comfortable in your skin, but I hope I can at least give you a break from the constant brain chatter, and we can rejoice and laugh at how similar we actually all are. I'm pretty sure that this was also a viewer recommendation, and because of it, I didn't pay any attention to who the author was. And I kept looking at the book once I bought it, thinking, why do I know that name? Why is it so familiar to me? And it was literally when I started reading the book and I was about 2 pages in, it suddenly dawned on me that I follow Hayley on TikTok because her skits of her intrusive thoughts and overthinking are so relatable, and I think she's so funny. So I can't believe this is actually the same woman. And it's so funny that the second I opened the book, I knew exactly who she was. I was also worried that because it was cheap, or the cheapest one, that it wasn't going to be very good. But then the second I realised who it was, I knew I'd be in safe hands. And I will say it's just as funny as her account on TikTok. It is great. So this is another one that I actually finished in a day. It's not what I would call a traditional self-help book. It's probably more just a stream of consciousness from her. But I think the fact that she is kind of laying herself bare so other people feel less weird or less alone is, you know, it still puts it in that self-development category. And it's just a really, I don't know, because it's so funny and is so relatable, I think it's just a really nice book to have and to read. And having something on the lighter end of self-development isn't necessarily a bad thing. There is some very, especially ones that I've read in the last couple of months, are very heavy, very intense. So this is like a very welcome relief. We'll just get straight onto the rating. I mean, it's an insanely quick, easy read. Will you learn a lot? Maybe not. But will you enjoy it? Absolutely. say, to be honest, this book does exactly what it says on the tin. It covers the rise and fall. It covers the evolution of dinosaurs all the way back to the, I think it's called Permian period. So that's even before, I guess, what we think of as traditional dinosaurs, before all of that. And then from that it goes on to Triassic, Jurassic, Cretaceous, so all the way through till the asteroid/comet that hit and wiped them all out. I am always wary of non-fiction books, no matter how much I like the topic, just because of that dryness factor. It's very easy for non-fiction books to go too technical, too in-depth in the science or background, which obviously for its probably target demographic it suits, but for laymen like me that like very simple English, it can lose me very quickly. And there are parts of this, not gonna lie, that are very dry. You know, so I definitely found I was reading it and then suddenly found myself wondering what we were going to have for dinner or what when I needed to do the Tesco shop, and then I'd suddenly check back into reality and not know what I've just read. So I will say that just as an FYI before you get into it. But where this book really comes alive is in the scene setting. I don't think I've ever read a non-fiction book, or I don't think I've ever read a book about dinosaurs where it really goes in detail as to what the earth would have looked and felt like for them at that time. And so you really get to understand how the world was set up with all the continents just as one big land mass. I think it was called Pangea. And what the weather fronts would have been like from one end to the other, and how when the continents started splitting up, about the mass extinction events in the Triassic, at the end of the Permian and the Triassic, I think, and then how the dinosaurs evolved on each new continent or each new landmass. It's really, really fascinating. The author is Steve Brusati, sorry, and he does a phenomenal job. It really does make you be able to vividly see the landscape that the dinosaurs would have lived in, and I really appreciate that because I don't think I've ever given it that much thought, but I very much enjoyed that part. I also absolutely love the chapter on T-Rex. It's funny to me, Jurassic Park is one of my favourite movies of all time, but it gets it so wrong from what they actually have found out about T-Rexes. Like, they used to have, I guess, a kind of feather, or like a fuzz, and also that they were as smart as chimps, which is crazy to me. And also that they, in Jurassic Park, where if they freeze, the T-Rex doesn't see that they're there, they'd be absolute toast. exist, then the state of the earth and what would have happened to the weather and the ecosystems and food chains and all this. So much detail, so cool to have it like kind of laid out for you to imagine, and then kind of, I guess, yeah, what happened from that point on to us today. So while there were some dry bits, for the most part, I think that is kind of secondary to the actual very fascinating story of dinosaurs. And there's much more in the book than I've spoken about, but they were just the bits that I particularly enjoyed. So I think if you're interested in dinosaurs like me, I think you'll really like this. But I also think if you're really into fossils and really into the process of looking for fossils or how they've managed to date them and understand all this stuff about their evolution, then I think you'll also really enjoy it. I do think it covers both quite well. And so for that reason, I gave this book an 8 out of 10. We are finally on to the last book of April, which was a personal choice TBR jar, and the prompt was a book with a person on the front, which made it very easy for me because I've been wanting to read this for a while. But it is The Five by Hallie Rubenhold, and the premise of the book is a non-fiction account of the 5 victims of Jack the Ripper. And I just love the premise because it's giving a voice and giving a story back to the women whose lives were taken. There's so much on Jack the Ripper and who he might have been, and very little is said about the women. And actually, what is said about them is usually quite derogatory. So I love that there's a book, that someone has taken the time to piece these stories together. I'm not sure what I was expecting from this book, but anger probably wasn't the main one. Not at the author, but just in Victorian England itself. And the thing is, I know that attitudes to women back then were not great. My dissertation, I studied English literature at university, and my dissertation was the representation of fallen women in Victorian fiction. So I'm well aware what society thought of women, but it just is in all facets of society, not just fallen women, but daughters, wives, just any woman in society just had no right at all. And the double standard is just infuriating. Like, if you didn't have a male protector, then you really did not stand a chance. And every woman who was single or was on the street or living alone for whatever reason was just usually just labelled as a woman of the night. I don't know if you can say the P word on here. And it's just so stifling for women that if they couldn't find employment, then they either were on the street, had to go into the workhouse, which was really no better than jail, or they had to shack up with a man. Like, come on. And I think as these stories unfold, you really see that society really did these women dirty, in that for some of them, they were in a position where they couldn't leave their husband even if they wanted to, or they could, but they would always be shunned from society as a ruined woman or a fallen woman because she failed as a wife to keep her husband happy, even if the reason why she was leaving was because he was having an affair. But she's failed. Women couldn't separate from their husbands. The husband could separate from their wives, but not the other way around. separated but not divorced. But because she's separated, she can't remarry, which means she can't have a partner, because if she has a partner, then it's a sin, because outside of marriage, any children would be illegitimate, but yet she's expected to find a man, otherwise she's no better than a woman of the night. So tell me how she's supposed to win in this situation. And in the context of some of these women, some of the victims of Jack the Ripper, they were labelled as a woman of the night, even though there was not a shred of evidence that they actually were. And so it's just very infuriating that women were just looked down on so much. And I know that it was an old time and it was different or whatever, but you can't tell me that some of these attitudes don't still exist. But and it's also just the fact that the government and society, it's very clear that it was a self-perpetuating cycle, that once you were down you couldn't get back up again, but there was nothing done to help and support, at least not in the time that I'm specifically reading about now. So infuriating. It brought out a lot of feminist rage. So yep, we'll talk about the women themselves now, and I'll consider this my rant over. But one thing I'd love to know how long it took Hallie to come up with all the information she needed to put this together, because it is such a painstaking, you can tell there's so much care that has gone into giving these women, like, right from their birth all the way up. It is very thorough, and it's not just the women's lives, it's really setting the scene of Victorian England, but all the way into minute detail, like what the common fashion was of the time, what people liked to eat and drink, just so that you got a real picture, not just of their personality and their lives, but of where their place would have been in society, what they would have seen as they're walking around the street. I know she's a historian, but it still would have taken so long to be able to put this all together, and it's incredibly impressive, I have to say. It really is. It really does help you feel like you know the women and that you understand their lives better, which is great, amazing. The one thing I will say is, Hallie mentions in the introduction to the book that there are some gaps, either because she's going off of records, so if people signed into the workhouse, for example, their name would have been on a sheet, so she knows, okay, at this point in time they were here, and then can track the movement. For the parts where there are no records, or it's very vague, there aren't any letters being written or whatever, she says in the intro that she's kind of filling in the gaps, but mainly based on fact, which for the most part is fine, because it helps you, when Hallie is describing how the women feel, she doesn't know that for certain, but it does help you to understand these women as people, not just objects in society or, moments in time. You understand that they are living, breathing, feeling people. But saying that, there is one of the 5 in particular where I think there is far too much embellishment going on, and it almost feels like she's going a bit too far to sympathise with her situation. I'm trying to say this in a way that doesn't feel like I'm undoing everything that I just said. Basically, this woman has a record of being a scammer. There's no real record of, no consistent, cohesive, comprehensive record of her life. She changed her identity multiple times. She didn't have many friends, and those she did have, she lied to. She was a scammer, that was known. And she was, despite all the others, she was known at one point to be a lady of the night. the very vindictive behaviour, and obviously she did not deserve what happened to her. I'm not saying that at all, but I think that Hallie almost goes too far to excuse some of the behaviour, to try and paint them all as angels or as women who were downtrodden. And they obviously all were let down by society. Let's not get it twisted, but I just think in this one particular instance it just felt like stepping too much into fiction and not rooted in the fact like the rest of them are. So yeah, that is the one thing that really, the only really like jarring thing from the book. Okay, onto the rating. I really struggle with this one to rate it. I keep changing my mind, and I will be brutally honest. I'm filming this on the 29th of April, and as of right now, 7:51 at night, I have not finished this book, but I am nearly there, and I will finish it before April is done, don't you worry. So maybe I might change my mind on the score by the time I'm actually finished, but right now as it stands, I would give this a 7 out of 10, purely because of the dip into fiction for me in what was otherwise a very strong book. So I do recommend this, but just bear that in mind. There we have it. 7, technically 6.5 books of April. Let me know if you've read any of these before, whether you agree with me. I mean, we had a very consistently high scoring bunch of books, which was not intentional, but we love it when all the books are great. So let me know if you feel the same, or if you would downrate some of them. I mentioned in a previous video, but I have recently started a coffee. It is a place where we can have more in-depth discussions about books, and I've actually, I'm currently in the process of putting together curated genre book trails as just a bit of fun. So if you're interested in, say, like